I've said it before. The answer is not to defund our police departments. It's to fund our police and give them all the tools they need, training and foundation and partners and protectors that our communities need. The budget puts more police on the street for community policing so they get to know the community they're policing.
That's the president promising to refund the police as part of his $5.8 trillion budget proposal. The announcement comes as the commander-in-chief's approval ratings have dropped to their lowest level in his presidency. So will this pledge help his party in the midterms? Here to discuss this is partner and president at Maslansky Partners Lee Carter. Good morning, Lee.
Good morning.
Good morning. So he's not in lockstep with a lot of the progressives, most of all the progressives in his party who have said defund. We've also heard reimagine. Even the president himself at one point said redirect. Why do you think he's doing it? Is it because of the poll numbers have dropped, because his poll numbers have dropped so significantly?
Well, I think there's no question about it. He needs to address the concerns of the American people, and the American people are more concerned about crime than they have been in a very, very long time. Nothing that he's said up to this point has restored confidence. If you look at his approval ratings on how people feel about his treatment of crime, on gun control, on all these issues, and especially on the police, he's not getting the support even among his own party. So I think he needs to address that, and he needs to come out strong on it. Now, is it enough to make a commitment in this way? I think people are skeptical. What does it mean for him to fund the police? He's talked about that meaning funding mental support. He's talked about it meaning a number of different things. When people aren't feeling safe, it's more than just about funding the police. It's about what are we going to do to make people in cities, especially where people are feeling most unsafe, feel safer. And it's not just about the police. It's about a comprehensive plan on how he's going to do that. So this is alone not going to be enough, but it's certainly a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's really about sending a message to the criminals. They're not going to get away with this. We don't want to walk outside and worry about someone robbing us or holding us up at gunpoint. All right, let's look at some of the polls. NBC polls show that 46% of the voters, registered voters, want a Republican-controlled Congress for the midterms. 44% of the voters want Democrats to control Congress. It's a 2-point margin, though. I was a little surprised by that. What are you finding?
Yeah, I was really surprised by that. I think that the Republicans should be ahead by a lot more, given the polling of the Biden administration as a whole. I mean, when you look at the way people are feeling about the economy, about inflation, about national security, about handling of Ukraine, about their personal safety across the board, you would think a lot of people would want an administration change, but we're not seeing that. And I think part of the problem is Republicans haven't set up a path forward. They've said, you know, they're attacking Biden, they're attacking all these plans, they're saying things aren't going well. The American people want to hear what they're going to do for them to make it better. So as we're going to the midterms and as we get closer, the Republicans need to lay out a plan on what we're for. We need to be talking about what we're going to do to address inflation, what are we going to do for the economy, how are we going to feel safer on our streets, and how are we going to feel safer abroad. As we watch what's happening in Ukraine, what would be different if the Republicans were in charge? And I think that's what the Republicans need to be focusing on, not what the Biden administration is doing wrong. The American people are seeing that loud and clear. No problem. People are really now tired of politicians or mistrustful of politicians in general. So what will be different? I think they need to take a plan out of, a page out of Youngkin's in Virginia, his playbook, and say, what did he do? There was something he gave choice back to the American people or the people of Virginia. He talked about parents having a right to choice. I think we need to see what we're for, not what we're against, and that's what Republicans need to do to sort of really run away with this going into the midterms.
And he wasn't scared to tell the people what he thought about CRT, what he thought about these vaccine mandates, and he listened to the parents. The parents, when we went down there, said he listened to us. It's the parents' party now. It's not the Republican Party, because we have independents, we even have Democrats.
That's right.
But he listened to us. Thanks so much, Lee, for coming on.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Great to see you, too.